Hello, welcome to day 6 of Arnhem We Have Ways. James Holland and I, Al Murray, basking in glorious Dutch sunshine.
Yeah, we are.
By the river at Arnhem, but...
We've done a lot of market, haven't we?
We've done all the market, but we've done that little to no
garden.
No garden. Because after all, that's what the code name means. The market's the airborne component. Garden is 2nd Army or 30 Corps thrusting dynamically up north.
Yes. And 30 Corps has had some criticism, it's fair to say, for not being fast enough and being a bit stodgy and all the rest of it. Yeah. There is this kind of thing, why did Horrocks not order them off until, after lunch on the day one?
Really weird. And also, they've held that side of the Somme Canal for at least 10 days and not done anything with it.
So there is a sort of sense of that there's a bit of a lack of urgency. And it's interesting with Horrocks because there's another time in the war where he's also missed a golden opportunity by not getting off his arse quick enough, and that is at the Battle of the Wadi Akarit, beginning of April 1943.
Yeah.
And the 4th Indian Division outflank the whole line, blow a massive hole in the Italian line, and when that happens, 10 Corps, of which he was commander back in those days, was supposed to kind of burst through and envelop the rest of them, and he just doesn't. And by the time they actually get their act together, it's too late and the Italians have pulled back.
Why not? Do we know why not?
No, it's never been satisfactorily answered. And so there is a bit of form going into that. Generally speaking, though, I think Horrocks does a pretty good job.
Was I right thinking he's injured in North Africa or in Italy?
Italy afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, so
this is before he's injured. He's been when does he take over? He takes over before Alamein, doesn't he? So it's he's been in the job quite a while.
And he's a Monty guy.
He's generally considered to be a bit of a good egg, I think.
And he's brought into 30 Corps, isn't he? Because the guy...
Because Crocker's been kicked out.
has been sacked. Yeah. He's one of the sackings in Normandy.
Yes.
And quite clearly, Monty's thinking, I need one of my reliable chaps.
He's just going to do what I tell him to do.
He's going to do what I tell him to do.
And do what Dempsey tells him to do, for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, have you seen the thing from the 50s, where the TV address, where he talks about this? It's incredible. Because he is a huge character, and Edward Fox in A Bridge Too Far, we've got to talk about the film, that's pretty much...
how he was.
That's how he was.
And he also Edward Fox does look a bit like...
Looks a bit like him, and he's got that sort of jolly chap thing going on.
He was known as Jorrocks, wasn't he?
Yeah, Jorrocks, that's right. Chaps. You think it's all that sort of chaps stuff that...
We're going to have a good party.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to put on a bloody good show and all that, give the Germans a...
Hit for 6.
Yeah, all that, yeah.
All that kind of stuff. And also there's this kind of sort of new kind of insouciance which has sort of swept into... British 2nd Army, particularly the Guards Armoured Brigade, but Division rather, and 30 Corps, where it's sort of a bit in for a dig to look too spick and span. So Horrocks is a great one for wearing polo necks and kind of corduroys and this sort of stuff, and battle dress, and looking quite cash.
Yeah.
It's obviously inherited, sort of come down
the
line
Monty
from
style,
Monty. But actually thereafter, John Buckley, my old chum John Buckley, he's written that brilliant book Monty's Men, and it's such a good account of the British Army in Northwest Europe. He argues very convincingly that actually 30 Corps really do get on with it, and actually apart from that kind of slight late start, actually you can't really fault them in their kind of...
Given what they're having to do.
No, and actually once they get past the kind of 101st area and they get across the... the Bailey Bridge, the Class 40 Bailey Bridge, which they put across the Zon, at Zon, that's done pretty quickly. It's done overnight. They're all off. You're talking about sort of 20,000 vehicles in 30 Corps.
Yeah.
You're talking about 2,200 and something just to service them. So it's a hell of a thing. It's not... and the problem is more vehicles means less speed, and so you're hurtling forward, of course, with your Guards Armoured Division and then brigades up the one road. You're not getting an awful lot of support from your divisions on the corps on the either side.
No.
You've got a heck of a lot of bridges to get across. So the fact that actually, by the afternoon of the 20th of September, they're at Nijmegen and only 10, 12 miles away from here, is actually
astonishing. Yeah.
It's going some.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm going to get a little bit of a feeling for this because there's a reenactment of 30 Corps going on, and it's not quite 20,000 vehicles, but it's certainly about 500.
Really?
Yeah, and I've got a trip in a Sherman tank, my good friend Jim Clark and Jamie Meechin, and they're going to be heading up, doing the last bit to the Groesbeek Heights.
Brilliant.
Which is where they're going to be camping tonight, and so
that's what
going to be taking a ride with them.
Now.
Yeah.
I look forward to
and hopefully stopping for lots of cups of tea and being really slow. Or will we not be brewing up, and will we actually be hurtling across? But actually, Jim did send me a photograph off going, just stopping for a cup of tea, and there they all are, all parked up, all got their enamel mugs of tea, going absolutely nowhere.
Well, I look forward to hearing it.
So I'm now down in Zealand. I've left Arnhem, left Al, and I've caught up with my good buddies Jim and Jamie and their wonderful tank, which is done up in the colours of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, who were part of 30 Corps because they were 8th Independent Armoured Brigade. And amazingly, we're being accosted by lots of locals, just as they would have been in 1944. The gag here is for the kids to come up and scream and whack me on the arse. It's a hilarious game. But Jim and Jamie, I mean, how's it been going? I mean, you've been out here for a couple of days.
Very good. The tanks are going very well, and it's nice and sunny, and all the people are friendly. It's a good time.
So it's a bit of a party, really, isn't it? I mean, isn't that the kind of whole point?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to get all the locals involved. You know, I mean, most of the events we do, we park up in the field and that's it, sort of thing. As this is quite nice because it gets all the locals involved, and it's a part of living history, really.
Now, one of the criticisms of 30 Corps, of course, is that they were a little bit slow and they didn't get a shift on. And, you know, I would argue quite to the contrary. But you sent me a photo earlier on, Jim, of everyone parked up having a cup of tea. You've been here for an hour or two. Everyone conveniently placed next to a bar with everyone having a few beers. You know, shouldn't you be stepping on it a little bit?
I think it's sort of waiting for the people at the top to give us the orders to move forward. So we got to wait, and it's, you know. So hurry up and wait is the old saying.
It's just like General Adair and General Horrocks, isn't it? But if we wander along here, so we've got Jim Sherman here. We've got a half track leading the way. We've got another Sherman. We've got a priest, which is a Sherman chassis with a gun in it, a 25-pounder in it, something a bit bigger than a 25-pounder maybe. A 105, yeah, a 105. Also, what's interesting about seeing these vehicles on the move like this, you can see all the extra clobber that's put on, whether it be backpacks, bivouacs, all sorts of stuff, and tents and sticks and ladders and all sorts of stuff. And this is exactly how it would have been. You can see this priest is carrying a sort of ammunition cart as well, already stacked up. You can see this, look, lots of ammunition in the back here. And here we've got an armoured car, plenty of those, of course. Here we've got the carrier, the universal carrier, also known as a Bren carrier. And again, look at all the fantastic clobber in it. There's a Bren gun there, all sorts of bits and pieces, a Thompson gun, camping equipment. And here we have a half track. And this is exactly what a column would look like. You know, it's really, it really does give you a taste of it. I mean, you know, you aren't 20,000 vehicles here, but there is a heck of a lot. Motorbikes, half tracks, lorries. It's just incredible. And we've got a really old lorry coming along now. Goodness me, this is a tank recovery vehicle. It's absolutely huge. The Remy, and you've got what looks like a Stuart Light tank. Plenty of those still, American built. Still plenty of those in 30 Corps at the time and used by the Americans as well. It's a hell of a thing, and it makes you realise just how big some of these vehicles were. Lots of Jeeps. The Airborne are here, so that's good in their pink berets and their Denison smocks. It really is an amazing picture. I'm hoping I can see talk to some more people. Excuse me, do you mind if I have a quick chat with you?
Yeah, sure.
So you've got your half track here, and what unit are you attached to?
We're with the 11th British Armored Division, yeah.
Very good. And where do you come from originally?
From the north of Holland.
Excellent. So you're Dutch. And what makes you want to take part in this British 30 Corps reenactment 75 years on?
It's part of the history, and we try to keep the history alive. So that's why I'm here.
But having some fun as well?
Having a lot of fun.
And are you stopping as much as 30 Corps did, do you think?
We have to wait a lot, so we probably do.
But tell me, this vehicle, I mean, how easy is it to drive and maintain? Is there a lot of maintenance that you've got to do on the way on a trip like this?
No. It starts every morning, it goes every morning, it's not a problem.
So this is superb, fantastic American engineering, mass production vehicle.
I think it is, yes. Well,
and is it quite easy to drive? I mean, one of the things that surprises me is actually just how modern a lot of these vehicles feel for the mid-1940s.
It's quite easy because I grew up on a farm, so I'm used to driving old tractors. So for me, it's quite easy. But I think for a lot of people, it's hard work. When you're making a turn, you have to hit the accelerator. It helps to kick around the wheels a bit and goes around the corner.
But nonetheless, an impressive piece of machinery. It's amazing to see this column, isn't it, in action like this?
It's amazing, a lot of vehicles over here.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, see you later.
See you later.
So, tell me about your vehicle here.
It's a 1942 Canadian military pattern, Chevrolet, made in Canada for the British Army, hence right-hand drive, powered by a straight six. Ford also made them under the same contracts.
Because it looks sort of British, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't really look American.
It looks. Well, there's no bonnet on it,
no.
And that was so they could get more on the ship for shipping. Because for every 8 of these, they would get an extra truck.
Yes. So real pragmatism at the heart of the design of it. So you can get it across the Atlantic in many numbers.
They didn't come with the back on generally.
No.
And they would stack them. Because we've dive wrecks where these.
So it has a chassis that runs underneath. You put the back on separately.
Yeah, and you can plonk another one on top of it because we've dive wrecks with these on.
And tell me, how easy is it to drive? Is it fairly straightforward?
It's reasonably straightforward. The pedals are not in the right position. The throttle's in the middle.
Right. Synchromesh?
What's one of those?
What's that?
Power steering?
No.
Yeah. The answer
so lots
is
of double declutching?
Yes. The answer is no, we don't have it.
Okay. But you've been having a good time doing this, have you?
Yes.
And what does it mean to you to kind of sort of be part of something that's 75 years on? I mean, it's incredible to be part of this, isn't it? And to see this incredible.
It is. You get a massive welcome in Holland.
Do you?
Yeah.
Showered with flowers. I see the flowers all over the place here.
Yes. Yeah. The kids are great. And people are knowledgeable about it.
Yes, they seem very proud of it in Holland, don't they?
Yes.
Their part they played in the war,
and they seem keen to educate the children that they know of it as well.
Yes.
I think that's really good because then, if they know and remember it, it doesn't get forgotten. And it doesn't get forgotten, it never happens again. Yeah. Education is everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They don't mind when we cause disasters like this. They just smile and laugh.
Yes. Well, you can see why a column like this on a single road takes a little bit of time.
Yeah.
That maybe doing it in kind of 48 hours is a little bit optimistic.
Yeah. The street furniture wouldn't have been a problem then. You just go for it. Yeah.
Well, that is true. Anyway, nice to talk to you. Right. Enjoy the rest of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So one of the deals is that to travel in 30 Corps reenactment of the 75th anniversary, you have to wear the right kit. And actually, we've just been slightly kind of pulled over the coals about not having the right wristband and all that sort of stuff. But Jim, you're wearing your denim battle dress here, not rather than the coveralls. They're pretty comfortable, aren't they? I've got my denim battle dress top on. I'm not that chuffed about having to wear serge trousers, I've got to say.
Bit too warm in this weather.
Bit too warm in this weather. Yeah. Definitely. And John, you've got the whole overalls on. How are you finding them? You weren't expecting to have to do this.
I wasn't expecting to have to do this. That's true. They're incredibly comfortable. My blue Adidas trainers are not quite completing the look, I have to say. I think I'll have to stay inside the tank.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to stick you in the turret, and you can put your head out, but you can't do anything else. Because the headphones sort of, I know they're not kind of period, but they kind of look about right. But Jim, I mean, your Sherman tank, I absolutely love this tank, and I've had the honour and privilege of having a little go in it a few times. But how long have you had it then?
I bought it in November '99.
And I seem to remember you saying that when you bought it, it wasn't in perhaps the best state.
No, it was ex-range target. It came off a Salisbury plane, so it had been shot at for about 20 years. Fortunately, it had been on a mortar range, so it hadn't had a sort of direct fire at it.
Right, so most of the chassis was sort of okay, pretty much.
Just a lot of the side armour and top armour was badly damaged.
And I know it's a bit vulgar talking about money, but how much did it cost you back in 1999?
I paid $4,000 for it, but at that time, a good Sherman was about £30,000.
Okay, so you then did it up yourself. How long did the restoration process take?
Because I was short of money, It took me about 3.5 years to collect the parts.
Yeah.
And then we restored it from the February 2004 until the June, but we actually rebuilt it in 17 days as a bet from a bare hull.
That's just absolutely amazing. So how much do you think you had to spend on it to get it up and running again in working order and looking as good as it does now?
At that time?
Yeah.
Probably owed me, when I had it running in 2004, including buying it, probably about 15,000.
Okay, so a working Sherman tank for less than 20 grand.
Yeah, not in pristine condition inside. It wasn't. It's not been restored inside. It's just the outside that looks really good.
Well, it does look absolutely amazing. But what's it worth now, would you say? You're a very rich man, aren't you?
The taxman's listening.
All right, you don't have to say that. Well, let's just say so considerably more than it was.
Not mine, because mine isn't in perfect condition. But a real nice restored Sherman.
Like that one there?
Like that one there. Probably 400 to 500,000.
Wow.
So it's a good investment for 4 grand.
Yeah, very, very good investment. Wow, God, that's amazing, isn't it? And really, I mean, if one wants to, I'm not looking at myself here, obviously, but if should someone want to buy a military vehicle of this period, I mean, what's your best starter? Do you think? I mean, how much are Jeeps these days?
Jeeps are expensive.
Are they?
They're £25,000-30,000 for
that's
one
a lot of money.
That's restored rather.
What about a truck?
Trucks, they're cheaper because they're harder to keep. You need someone to keep them. Jeeps you can keep in your own sort of little garage.
Yeah.
But when you get into trucks, you need bigger tools and somewhere to store it. Heavier lifting gear. So
it's not for the faint-hearted, is it? Being part of the military vehicle trust, or
no. And if you've got to start paying people to restore your vehicle for you or do the work on it, that's when it hurts.
That's when it gets very expensive.
Yeah.
So the key is know how to be an engineer.
Yeah.
Right, it's time to start up, isn't it?
Well, that column's going. I'm probably have to follow on behind them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get going. Well, things are starting up. Our tank is starting up in a burst of exhaust fumes. This is not good for the world's carbon footprint, it has to be said. Trucks are beside us. It looks like the town's on fire, the amount of smoke that's coming out of these various exhausts. So I think we're primed for action. A bit like XXX Corps, we're a little bit late, but let's not worry about that too much. The sun is still shining. It's a beautiful afternoon, and I've got to say, it really is absolutely amazing to be a part of this and to see this column in action, because you kind of half close your eyes and you really can imagine this scene back in 1944. A Dutch town, the same brick buildings, the same church as a backdrop, the Dutch flag now out, fluttering from the bar, people are standing around watching it go through. A motorcycle outrider weaves its way through, trying to get through to lead us off. 2 more motorcycles to one side, the riders in their Denison smocks. It's really, you get a terrific sense of power, actually. The sense of scale and force of it all. I mean, this is quite a thing. So we've got 2 Matadors coming up alongside us with British Second Army logo on the right-hand side and their unit numbers on the left-hand side. Matadors, really big, heavy, chunky trucks, very sort of blunt-nosed, but real workhorses. They just don't look quite as sort of modern as the American equivalents, but they were good trucks. They had great torque and great carrying capacity. Behind us, we've got another Sherman tank, also done up in the colours of the 8th Independent Armour Brigade. People in the turrets. I mean, I'm going to take a photo, actually, because it really is an incredible scene. And we're off, rumbling forward through Zeeland town to south of Nijmegen. Lots of people standing around watching us, seeing the column take off, and the lead vehicle, a half-track, is in the colours of the Guards Armoured Division, which appropriates off. And now we're off, we're sort of rumbling forward. Sort of great surge of power, the grinding of the gears, and a sort of a ticking kind of sort of rattle of the rubber tracks on this cobbled street here in Holland, people waving. It really is a hell of a scene, I've got to say. So I'm sitting up in the turret with John here. John works with Goalhanger Films. Just a week or so ago was in, where were you? Equatorial Guinea, in West Africa, covering a FIFA World Cup qualifying match. So it's kind of the extremes of your job, John.
It's certainly quite different, that is for sure, yeah. It's unbelievable. I honestly can't quite get my head around it. The sights, the smells, it's a whole sensory overload, to be honest.
It really is, isn't it? You get that sort of the smell of the burning fuel, of rubber, of oil. Everyone's really grubby, aren't they?
Yeah.
You really notice it's sort of day on the road, and I've got the microphone right by me, but I'm having to lift up my voice. I mean, it is seriously noisy here.
It's incredibly noisy. It feels incredibly authentic. I know that sounds quite bizarre, but you're automatically transported back to how you can imagine it must have been.
Yeah, you really do get a sense of it, don't you? And just imagine if you're on the victory roll, you're kind of moving up through Normandy, across the Somme, across the River Seine, up into Belgium and then on into Holland, and you're going through these towns which all look incredibly like this. Everyone's throwing flowers at you, giving you wine, cheering you on your way. You're going to feel pretty good about yourself. We're just going past a Dutch windmill. Absolutely kind of true to the cliche. It's perfect, isn't it? We've got an outrider coming up alongside us now, hurtling past in his leather jerkin. I've got to say, now I'm up in the turret, I'm quite grateful for my serge battle dress trousers. And actually, I suppose, what are we doing here? About sort of 15, 20 miles an hour, something like that? I mean, it's not actually that slow, is it, really?
No, not at all.
I mean, you can see how, when they get on a roll, if the enemy isn't in the way and there's not too many mines to deal with, actually, as an armoured column, you really could make some progress. Now, in a Sherman tank, there's a different way of going over a roundabout, and that's basically just to sort of go straight over it, literally.
So we're obviously having an awful lot of fun doing this at the moment, and it's thoroughly enjoyable. 75 years ago, what would it have been like when they left here heading for Nijmegen?
Well, heading for Nijmegen, they just wouldn't have known what to expect. We don't know how far the enemy has reached. We don't know whether the Germans are in the area. They have had trouble all the way along. I mean, actually, the run-up from Son up to Nijmegen is the best day they have, where they make the most progress. They do get to sort of the edges of Nijmegen in one day. That's pretty good going. A bit like this column today that we're in now. I mean, that's where they've come from this morning. But yeah, you'd be feeling, I don't know, I suppose, when you're surrounded by danger, when you've witnessed so much danger, the quiet moments, the temptation to get a little bit blasé and to think you're okay, I would have thought must be absolutely huge. And you just sort of, I can see that the temptation to sort of let your guard down a little bit. There's also that feeling of sort of safety in numbers, isn't there? When you're in a big long column, you feel a bit more protected, a bit more invincible. Also, there's the 2nd Tactical Air Force overhead, who are kind of flying sorties absolutely tirelessly to support you. And
so that's all going on
that's going ahead.
Really.
Yeah, there's a whole wing of rocket-firing Typhoons supporting this operation. But they can't be over all the time because they're at the outer reaches of their range, really.
And as they leave Zealand, like we just have now, were 30 Corps under constant attack at this stage, or was it?
No, so they have a very good run along this day, where on the 20th of September, where they don't come up against a huge amount of opposition.
Right.
So this is quite a comparatively easy day for them. But I just, I've not been there, obviously. I've never experienced it. So I don't know how on edge you are all the time. Or this is the point I was trying to make, because you face so much danger, when you get a nice clear run like this, do you just sort of relax a little bit? If you're first in action, if you're first joining the front line, you must just feel terrified the whole time. But there must be a process where you do start to get used to it. So we've just passed through Grave, and that's been quite interesting because this was the first bridge that the 82nd Airborne had to capture. And they had two drops. They had one on the kind of sort of north-eastern side of the bridge, and they had a little one, just a small little drop, so that they did understand the concept of capturing a bridge by dropping men at both ends. It wasn't as though they'd never thought of it. So we just passed a German bunker, and this is the main Grave bridge that 82nd Airborne had to capture. So where we are now, I'm just looking back, just in these sort of fields around us, that was where they did their first little drop. And actually they understood the concept of the best way to capture a bridge is by dropping men at both ends. It's seriously noisy crossing this bridge, I don't mind telling you. This is another wrought iron bridge crossing the River Maas, which obviously flows into the River Meuse. And it was across the Meuse that the Germans broke through in France back in May 1940. So there is a sort of synergy about the Allies crossing back across the River Maas later on in the war in 1944. Phew, well, we're off the bridge. I can actually slightly hear myself think now. So we're now on the northern side of the River Maas and the Grave Bridge. This is where one of the main drop zones was. So Nijmegen is not very far away at all. You know, this whole area was the 82nd Airborne under General Jim Gavin were given the Nijmegen area to capture. And obviously the three different parachute infantry regiments, the equivalent of a British brigade of 3 battalions each, were each given different areas to capture. But you know, it's making you realise that it is quite a big old area that they're covering. So right now we're going past one of the drop zones and landing zones, so it wasn't just airborne troops that were dropping here. Gliders also came in. They're Waco gliders. And looking at these fields, you can see why they would land here. I mean, they're just big, wide, flat, open area. The perfect place in which to attack the bridge over the River Grave, but also to move up to Nijmegen, which is just away to our left, to the north a little bit. We're now sort of heading roughly kind of east-northeast, I suppose. Well, we're nearly there, actually. We're climbing up to the Groesbeek Heights at the moment, and what's surprising me is just how steep it is. It really is a substantial climb, and you can see why in this otherwise largely flat landscape, why these would be called the Groesbeek Heights. And of course it is these heights that General Gavin, apparently with General Browning's approval, put the majority of his troops towards clearing before going all out for Nijmegen Bridge. A really controversial decision, because when 30 Corps arrived up in Nijmegen on the evening of the 20th of September, they still hadn't, on the 19th rather, they still hadn't captured the Nijmegen Bridge. It wasn't until the following afternoon that they made their effort to go for the all-out attempt to capture it, and the famous Val crossing. And we need to have a little pause, I think, to let the engine cool down. Well, we pulled over for a little bit. The Sherman's just got a little bit hot and just needs to cool down for a bit, and then it'll be absolutely fine. I've got to say, it's a heck of a climb up here. You know, we're following up the road up to the Groesbeek Heights, and it is a long, steep climb. So we pulled over, we're just cooling down a little bit. But the interesting thing about this tank is it's marked up in the colours of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry. And it's a rather special tank, really, because the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry were the single unit with more battle honours than any other from the Second World War in the British Army. And they're part of the 8th Independent Armoured Brigade. And it was just incredibly tough. being in this unit, because they were in this independent armoured brigade, what would happen is they weren't in a division, so they would be supporting infantry divisions. So what tended to happen is they were constantly in the van of any advance, and they were constantly in firefights the whole time. So they saw a huge amount of action. And actually being in a tank, a Sherman tank, I mean, the great beauty of these tanks is their reliability, ease of maintenance, steady gun. You know, we've talked about this before in the past, about the sort of stabilising gun gyro and all other features. You know, the fact that you can whip the engine out and put another one in a couple of hours. All those things were really, really good, but they were incredibly dangerous, and it was brutally tough. And it was interesting because just a little bit earlier on, we're sitting here on the tank. There were kind of sort of 5 of us, and felt like quite a small little gang of us, really. And you know, you're thinking that's what a tank crew was. You know, you would be sort of living and breathing and doing everything together, living together, fighting together, sleeping, you know, by your tank together, doing the maintenance together. You know, this was your home. And yet, just like that, you know, you could all be snuffed out. I mean, it was absolutely brutal. And it's really interesting with the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, just in the Normandy campaign alone, from the 6th of June 1944 to the 3rd week of August, the casualties were absolutely enormous. In an armoured regiment like the Sherwood Rangers, you'd have around about 800 men, of which about 200 would actually be in the tanks. The rest would be sort of, you know, support crew and so on. And of those 200, around 36 would be officers. And the Sherwood Rangers, just in the Normandy campaign alone, lost 42. So more than 100% of their officers were lost, you know, statistically. And out of the rest of the crew of other ranks, 175, I think it was, were lost out of 200. The reason the officers were so, the casualties were so high was because, and you can see this by actually operating this Sherman tank, you can see so little. You know, and the driver and the co-driver, for the most of the time, when it's safe, they're driving around with their heads sticking out. But in a battle station, what you would do is you'd close the lid and you'd be dependent on your periscope. But the periscope enables such a little area of vision. I mean, you really could see absolutely diddly squat. And so to be able to manoeuvre around, to be able to see what, you know, and it's obviously very dangerous to be moving around blind, even in a tank like this. So the commander was the one who would tend to constantly have his head out of the turret. And that made him incredibly vulnerable, because the reason the turret is up, you've got the commander's position up here, is so you can see. But that means you're high, which means you've got a high silhouette, which means your head sticking out, which means you're much more easy to see. And it was, you know, being sniped at, shot at, and all the rest of it. You know, it was an incredibly dangerous job. And the problem is, it doesn't take much for a high velocity round to enter one of these tanks. And if it does, just the kinetic energy, the force of that, and the power of that hitting some of the propellant that's in the shells, which are lining all these, the whole of the turret and on the sides of it and all the rest of it. You can just imagine what's happened if that ignites. Boom, the whole thing goes up, and everyone inside of here is absolutely toast. They're kind of just charred goo. And really, you couldn't think of a kind of worse place to be than inside a tank in a major battle. And although the British and the Allies were particularly good at trying to keep their casualties, their frontline casualties, to an absolute bare minimum, if you were unfortunate enough to be in the front line, in the infantry or in tanks, your chances of getting through unscathed were worse than they were had you been on the Western Front in the First World War. So I'm now at the main camp for the 30 Corps reenactment, just on the Groesbeek Heights, just outside Nijmegen. I've caught up again with Jim. Jim, thank you for yesterday. That was amazing, that trip. It was absolutely brilliant.
Oh, pleasure.
And you had a good night last night. The stars were out. You got the fire going.
Yeah, very cold, but we've got our own little fire, little pot-bellied stove, which we put coal and wood on. It was very warm and toasty in the tent.
And it's absolutely amazing, this, isn't it? I mean, there are a lot of vehicles here.
I think 250 here. That's what should be here anyway.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And what's amazing is a military policeman has just gone past. You may just have heard the motorbike going then, rounding everyone up for the morning briefing. So we're going to sort of try and listen in on that. But it's quite something to behold. And it is just amazing how many vehicles are still up and running, isn't it, after all these years?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of different vehicles as well. Not just the same old Jeep, Dodge, GMC type show. It's some real rare stuff here, it's which is really nice.
Yeah, this one here, we've got, this is a sort of tank transporter, a low loader with a what looks like a Stuart tank on it. So what vehicle is that? Do you know?
It's a Scammell with a tank transporter used by the British early on in the war, probably before we had the Diamond T's and tank transporters that came in from the States. So it's very, very slow. It's very slow and sort of cumbersome, but it is good.
But can pull some weight.
Yeah, certainly pull some weight. Yeah. But very hard to operate. No power steering. Very, very difficult.
Well, we've got the briefing now, so let's listen in on that. And Jim, I'll catch up with you later. Well, I've now bumped into my old mucker, Tobin Jones, and Tobin and I go back a little way, don't we, Tobin? And great to see you here. And Tobin, I should say, is a purveyor of many fine British military World War II vehicles. Currently restoring 3, I think, Cromwell tanks?
Yes, a mixture of Centaurs and Cromwells, but that's the day job, if you like. So this is just a bit of fun and entertainment.
And we're wandering through the camp, and it's amazing the number of vehicles. I think there's sort of 250 or something here, and there's field kitchens and various trucks. And the emphasis is this is all British stuff. I mean, obviously the British were using a lot of American vehicles as well, but by and large, this is British vehicles.
Correct. The operation is a reenactment of 30 Corps, and the vast majority were British vehicles. Yeah. So a fair amount of Canadian stuff in here as well, a little bit of American, but nearly all British, and that's what we like.
So what have we got here? Because this looks like this is like a water tanker, is it?
This is a Bedford 1500 weight. I think it's called a Bedford MWT, and it's essentially a Bedford MW but with a water tanker on the back, and you can see this framework which is all which covers the tank, and that was because particularly in the desert the Germans knew that a water tanker was a very valuable target, so they would mortar it or shell it, but if an aircraft came over and saw this in convoy, it's just going to look like an ordinary Bedford MW truck.
And Tobin, looking at this truck here, I mean it's a reminder, isn't it, of the just incredible logistical headache of trying to keep that many people on the road and vehicles. I mean, if you're a fully mechanised army, I mean, what is it, 20,000 vehicles, I think, for 30 Corps?
Yep.
Well over 2,000 vehicles just to service those 20,000 vehicles.
That's right.
And everyone's got to be fed 3 times a day and watered, and watered particularly.
Yep.
I mean, what a challenge that is.
Absolutely. And ammunition. But it's the headache of armies over the years. And it didn't matter whether it was 100 horsemen galloping over the steppes and looking for their next target, or whether it was something like 30 Corps, where it's the point of a spear doing the job, but it's everything that comes behind. The ammunition, the fixing weapons that fall to pieces, fixing clothes. The blokes have all got to be dressed. The food, as you say, the water, absolutely everything has got to come up, and that's ignoring the medical needs, where you've got things going the other way with wounded people going back and getting to decent medical attention as quickly as they possibly can. It really was a logistic nightmare in a way, but also an immense achievement. And I think
it's absolutely. See, that's the thing, and it's that operational level of war that so often gets missed out of the narrative. And I think you just sort of take it for granted. You sort of, well, why were 30 Corps so slow? Everyone's sort of getting really angry about it. It's like, well, you try organising 20,000 vehicles plus men.
Yeah.
However, but what is it? Sort of 100,000 men or whatever it is, trying to get them 60 miles. I mean, it is an incredible. That's just without the fighting.
Absolutely.
And it was really. What was so interesting yesterday was to say we were in a column of 35 vehicles, I think it was, and to see that winding through. And Jim and his Sherman tank, he had to stop after 18 miles because the engine was just too hot and it just needed to cool down for a little bit. And he said, on preference, it would be every 10 miles.
That's right.
And you think, crikey, every 10 miles you've got to stop, and you're on the... there's just so many constraints against you moving 60 miles really quickly.
Absolutely.
That makes the rapid advance from Normandy up to Belgium and the Dutch border so incredibly impressive. That happens just in a matter of days.
Correct.
But the idea of going 80 miles in a day or 60 miles in 2 days, which is what they're trying to do with 30 Corps back in September 1944, the challenges are just legion.
They are, but I think people sometimes forget that we'd gone through the dark days of 1940, where we were on the receiving end of the boot, if you like. And although people have said that the British forces then sat at home through until the invasion, in fact there was immense amounts of preparation going on, building up the skills of organisation, logistics, and the material itself necessary to firstly come into Europe, but then to go to the second stage, the third stage, and follow on through. And I think the Allies, and the British particularly, we had improved our methodology immensely.
Yeah, since 1940.
Yeah, we really had become very good at what we were doing.
And also that ability to maintain in the field. I mean, part of the design of vehicles as well was to make them reliable, first and foremost, but easy to maintain as well.
Correct.
And have light aid detachments really close, the B echelon of any unit really close, not very far away, so that you can exchange a multi-bank engine out of a Sherman tank in 2 hours if you really have to, and then you're good to go and you can crack on again.
Correct.
And you can keep going.
And it was all about keeping that spear moving forwards. And I know here at Arnhem there were all sorts of other complex reasons why things didn't go as they perhaps could have done, but that logistical thrust and the logistical effort was not part of the reason. Everything that they needed was there. At times it was quite a little bit difficult getting it right up to the tip of the spear, but that's war, and things go wrong.
Of course. Of course. And looking around here, I mean, we had to leave Jim and disappear off into Nijmegen last night, just as he was climbing up to the Groesbeek Heights. But what was it like coming in here yesterday? It must have been amazing. It was a beautiful evening, wasn't it?
It was lovely. We'd all had a long dusty day, so that our throats were parched.
Yes.
But we came in, we did what soldiers all over do. We checked the vehicles and made sure that they were okay.
Yeah, that's the first job.
Really, yes. Yeah. We then quickly set up.
And there's a lot of dust here, isn't it? And again, you can imagine it would have been like this back in 1944. These are the kind of problems you're dealing with. I mean, I can feel it on the back of my throat just now, but all the vehicles I see are getting covered in a little sort of skin of dust, aren't they?
That's right. And as we were setting up the tents, again, everything gets covered in dust. And one of our team has brought along a mobile pub, which is a lovely thing to have here. But even on top of the first couple of pints that we pulled, there was a skin of dust.
That's amazing. Well, then let's wander along. So we've got an ambulance here, and then let's wander back to your vehicle. So what have you brought over this time?
Oh, we've brought the Morris Portee and the 17-pounder anti-tank gun.
Yep. You've got the 17-pounder here?
Yep.
Excellent.
We brought a Bedford QLR, which was with the listening service, and in fact ended its war pretty much exactly where we are now.
Maintenance checks going off on our right, by the way?
That's a Daimler Dingo.
Yeah.
And they're superb vehicles, but sometimes the ignition can be a little bit over complex, particularly when they're 75 years old.
What about these American half-tracks? We're looking at a couple of these here. I mean, they're pretty good, aren't they?
Very good vehicles.
Reliable?
Very reliable.
Good engine?
Good engines. These two, I think, are international. They are internationals. I've only ever owned a white half-track before. You can tell the difference because on the internationals, they've got a curved back edge.
Right.
The whites had a square back edge.
Right, and that's how you know.
But having said that, they were all very, very similar vehicles. And
is this a Firefly here, by the looks of it?
No, this isn't. This is
a high-velocity American one.
It is. This is a late, and perhaps we ought to move somewhere else, James, because since our last programme, this isn't my best area of expertise.
No, that's all right.
But this is a late model Sherman.
Yeah.
Cast hull. The additionally wide tracks and the horizontal.
Gosh, look at that!
Yes,
completely
suspension.
Different suspension.
Yeah.
Wow, so that would be post-war, would it?
No, tail end of the war.
Tail end of the war.
Here we've got a Canadian truck. This is a C15, I believe. No, C60.
Yeah. And then you've got the good old-fashioned where you stand weapons carrier.
That's right. You've got a very rare one over there, which is a Staghound armoured car.
Yep.
And there were quite a lot of those in this part of the war.
And you've just restored one of these, haven't you?
I've just restored one of these, yes, that's correct. So it's a vehicle that's close to my heart.
Yeah, and pretty good?
Very good. It's an unusual vehicle in that it has a pair of GMC 270 cubic inch engines, 6-cylinder inlines.
And what sort of speed will these do?
This will do a very happy 55 miles an hour on the road.
Really?
Yeah, quite advanced. It's got electro-hydraulic steering.
Wow. That sounds advanced.
Yeah, I mean, the engines drive through a fluid fly. Each engine drives through a fluid flywheel, then down through a GMC automatic gearbox, down into a transfer box, and then into the normal transmission, giving you 2 or 4-wheel drive.
Wow! And these were pretty prevalent, were they?
They were.
So your reconnaissance battalion, they would.
Well, there's a story there too, because although these vehicles were originally designed for the British when we were fighting in the desert,
yep.
And it's really a desert vehicle, so it's the equivalent of a tank on wheels. It could go very fast. It weighs in at 14.7 tonnes, I think, when it was fully equipped.
So half a Sherman.
Yeah, but it moves quickly. It's got a small 37mm gun, but manoeuvrable, good. A little bit too wide. I think we're talking 8'6" wide.
Right.
And particularly when they first showed up in operation in Italy, they were just too wide for the roads.
Right.
Italian roads, which are really paths. But over here, the Canadians, I believe the Poles had them as well, and they were a popular vehicle.
Yeah.
Having said that, they didn't use them for reconnaissance so much because they were too big.
Right.
And the British idea of reconnaissance is much more akin to the Daimler Dingo, where it's a small, quiet vehicle that doesn't get seen,
right,
rather than this American view, which is a big old vehicle that comes in and lobs shells at you and then retreats. This is another unusual vehicle. This is a Morris light reconnaissance car. This one belongs to...
I've never even seen one of those before.
No, this one belongs to Bovingdon, the Tank Museum.
Right.
And again, it's a little bit of a Morris... It's a nice vehicle using as many of the original Morris parts as they could, with a tin can body put over the top and a hand-operated turret. But they crop up in the photographs. They were here, and they were here in reasonable numbers, and performed a really good job.
Well, yeah, it's amazing. And then these are little dingoes.
Dingoes again, yes, yep. Daimler Dingoes, various marks, but they're super little vehicles because they will go along at 55 miles an hour. So if you're on the road, it's a sensible vehicle to have.
Yep.
Pretty small. I know 2 of the Guards soldiers who were here a couple of nights back, and 2 of them actually managed to spend the night sleeping in one, which is really something
That's quite an achievement.
Of an achievement. But they're very quiet. You sneak along 4-wheel drive, cross-country. You push forward, reconnaissance to find out where the enemy are, what strength they're in, have a quick look, and then nip away without being seen.
So if one wants to go and sort of, this seems like a good starter vehicle for the person new to military vehicles.
Yep. Yep.
How much?
They're becoming much more expensive. So, particularly so many of the British vehicles are at the moment. But probably £30,000 would buy you a Dingo that needed a bit of fettling.
Right. But not too much.
Not too much.
That's not quite a lot of money, isn't it?
An immensely high quality finished vehicle would probably be around the £40,000-45,000 mark.
Okay, so yeah, it's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. Here's another armoured car you can see there, which is a Daimler armoured car.
Yep. And they're a bit more prevalent, were they? Because they're not quite as big as a Staghound, is it?
No, that's right. Again, fairly common. It's the big brother to the Daimler Dingo.
Yes.
Very similar in many ways, but strangely built on a chassis rather than on a solid hull, which the Dingo was as well. And you can see the chassis rails here along the sides.
Yeah.
And then the armoured section is literally just bolted on top.
That's amazing. And just over here, we've got another Sherman. We've got a what looks like an M10 or an M18.
Yes, yeah, an Achilles, I think, with a 17-pounder.
And here's
gun.
an old friend in front of us.
Correct. Here's the
Morris
is your
17-pounder.
17-pounder behind, and these were vehicles which came up with 30 Corps, and they were part of the anti-tank defence. We know the weapon well, and it tows well. It does everything that I think could have been asked of it back in the day.
Now, you'll remember we did a little experiment with this, because it's very interesting. There was a sort of book on British artillery, and one of the criticisms of the 17-pounder was that it took a while to sort of get into position. It took too long to get into position. And so you and I and our team, we got together yes. and I think we were with this vehicle, weren't we?
That's right.
And we unshackled it. We had the team, and we had a blank shell in the breech, and I think it was about 23 seconds, wasn't it?
That's right.
I mean, it was incredibly easy to manoeuvre into position. I still don't understand where that criticism comes from.
No, but there's a lot of these things that ideas that start to gain ground, and it's very difficult. You need to do these things and try them.
Right.
And
learning from the process of doing. I'm a big fan of that.
I'm not a natural reenactor, but having said that, doing these things, and when you're in the field and you try it and you suddenly find, oh, this is particularly easy.
Yeah.
Or on some occasions, things that you thought were very easy are actually much more complicated.
And of course, the 17-pounder just had the phenomenal velocity.
Yes.
I mean, sort of over 3,000 feet per second. And then once you put the armour-piercing, discarding sabot, up to 4,000 feet a second, and that is really going some, and that's actually an improved performance on the 88mm, the dreaded, infamous 88mm.
Yes.
And an awesome weapon, and every single British infantry division by this stage was supported by 110 anti-tank guns.
Correct.
I mean, that's a heck of a lot.
Well, again, we were learning from the lessons of 1940, where the right equipment wasn't available, and where it was available, it wasn't deployed and it wasn't able to be used, very often because of logistics.
Yeah.
And you look back at the 1940 campaign, and very often you had artillery batteries that didn't have the right ammunition.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work. They might as well not be there unless they're able to do the job and to be effective.
Well, we've come all the way back to your pub that Tom set up,
yes.
the Boar's Head. I'm really impressed that, after doing some basic maintenance checks last night, you managed to get this out, and it looks like you're all incredibly comfortable.
It is. It's a nice way of living.